You have exactly 3 hours to be at the Whitmore dinner. Dress code: black tie. Savannah Pierce froze with the phone pressed against her ear, the coffee forgetting to go down her throat. Her mind processed the words once, twice, and still couldn't fit them into any scenario that made sense. 2 weeks earlier, the world had seemed infinitely simpler. Savannah remembered every detail of that afternoon. The Chicago sun streaming through the windows of the 32nd floor, transforming the skyscrapers into gold. The email on her computer screen with the subject line, "Contract closed, Paradigm Technologies." Her fingers trembling as she clicked to open it. $18 million, the largest contract in the history of the Chicago branch of Whitmore and Associates. She had sat there, alone in her tiny cubicle, biting her lip to keep from screaming. 6 years. 6 years of working herself to exhaustion, sleeping at the office, sacrificing weekends and relationships, and finally, she had done it. The phone call from Richard Carver, regional director, came minutes later. "Pierce, I need you in my office. Now." And then, with the same casualness he might use to announce the lunch menu, he said, "You're being promoted. Director of Business Development. Mr. Whitmore wants to meet you personally." Savannah smiled for an entire week. Now, standing in the middle of her one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, that memory seemed to belong to another life. "Margaret, you can't be serious," she said to the executive assistant on the other end of the line. "The dinner is tonight." "I didn't even know there was a dinner." "The invitation was sent yesterday, directly from Mr. Harrison Whitmore's office." "I was in meetings all day. No one told me." "Miss Pierce," Margaret's voice was polished ice. "Harrison Whitmore doesn't invite employees to his residence. He summons them. The last person who declined an invitation is selling insurance in Nebraska." Savannah closed her eyes. What exactly is this dinner? A pause. A formal dinner with the Whitmore family. Mr. Harrison will be present, obviously. Mrs. Victoria, and... Margaret hesitated almost imperceptibly. And the heir, Callum Whitmore. Savannah's stomach plummeted. Callum Whitmore, the prodigal son. The ghost who haunted every corridor of the company without ever being seen. They said he had left the family at 22, refusing to take over the empire. They said he had recently returned, forced by some agreement that no one knew about. They also said he was incapable of being impressed by anything, or anyone. "Why me?" Savannah asked, her voice weaker than she would have liked. "Because you closed the Paradigm contract. Because you're the new director. And because Harrison Whitmore wants to personally evaluate every piece before placing it on the board." Piece. The word kept reverberating after Savannah hung up. She looked at the clock. 5:47 p.m. 3 hours. 3 hours to transform herself into someone who could survive a dinner with the most powerful family in Illinois. She rushed to the closet, already knowing she had nothing suitable. Her best dress was from a clearance sale 2 years ago, and black tie meant black tie. It meant women wearing jewelry that cost more than her apartment. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "The limousine will be at your address at 8:30 p.m. Don't be late." Savannah sat on the edge of the bed, her heart thundering. 2 weeks ago, she had achieved everything she had ever wanted. Now, looking at that insufficient dress hanging on the closet door, she began to understand that the real challenge hadn't been closing the contract. The real challenge was just beginning. And she had no idea that, in a few hours, she would meet Callum Whitmore's gaze, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The Whitmore estate materialized through the limousine's tinted windows, like something conjured from a fever dream. Savannah had seen photographs, of course. Everyone in Chicago had. The mansion had graced the covers of Architectural Digest 3 times, and its annual Christmas gala raised more money for charity than most corporations earned in a fiscal quarter. But photographs were flat, lifeless things. They couldn't capture the way the Georgian columns seemed to pierce the darkening sky, or how the windows blazed with golden light that felt less like warmth and more like a warning. Turn back. That light seemed to say, "You don't belong here." "Miss Pierce." The driver's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "We've arrived." She didn't move. Through the window, she watched other guests ascending the marble steps. Women in gowns that moved like liquid silk. Men in tuxedos that probably cost more than her annual salary. They walked with the easy confidence of people who had never questioned their right to exist in spaces like this. Savannah looked down at her dress. She had called in every favor she had. Her college roommate Delia worked at a boutique on Oak Street and had smuggled out a black Valentino that was supposed to go back to the warehouse in the morning. It fit perfectly, almost suspiciously so, and when Savannah had looked in the mirror, she'd felt something close to hope. But now, watching those women glide up the steps with diamonds dripping from their ears and throats, she understood the cruel mathematics of wealth. Her borrowed dress was beautiful. Theirs were expensive. And in this world, the distinction mattered. "Miss Pierce?" The driver again. "Is everything all right?" "No," she wanted to say. "Nothing is all right. I should be home eating leftover Thai food and watching true crime documentaries like a normal person on a Thursday night." Instead, she straightened her spine. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." The foyer alone could have swallowed her entire apartment. Savannah stepped through the doors and immediately felt the air change, heavier somehow, thick with the weight of old money and older expectations. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, scattering light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The marble floor gleamed so brightly she could see her own reflection staring back at her, wide-eyed and terrified. "Miss Savannah Pierce?" A woman in a crisp black uniform appeared at her elbow, holding a tablet. "Yes, that's me." "Welcome to Whitmore House. The family is receiving guests in the East Drawing Room. May I take your wrap?" Savannah surrendered her shawl, also borrowed, also due back tomorrow, and followed the woman through a series of corridors lined with oil paintings that probably belonged in museums. She recognized a Sargent, a Cassatt. What might have been an actual Monet? 6 years, she thought. 6 years at that company, and I never knew this was where the money lived. The East Drawing Room opened before her like a stage set. And there they were. Harrison Whitmore stood near the fireplace, a crystal tumbler in hand, holding court with a cluster of executives Savannah vaguely recognized from quarterly reports. He was smaller than she'd expected, compact and precise, with silver hair swept back from a face that reminded her of a hawk. Sharp eyes, sharp cheekbones, sharp smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Beside him, draped across a velvet settee like she'd been arranged there by a photographer, was Victoria Whitmore. Savannah's breath caught. She had seen Victoria in magazines, at charity events, in the society pages that she definitely didn't read during her lunch breaks. But in person, the woman was something else entirely. Ageless in that way only serious money could buy, with honey blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon and a gown of deep emerald that matched her eyes. Those eyes found Savannah immediately, swept over her in a single glacial assessment, and dismissed her just as quickly. Savannah's skin prickled. "Ah, there she is." Harrison Whitmore's voice boomed across the room, and suddenly every head turned in her direction. Oh, God. "Miss Pierce." He was moving toward her now, hand extended, that hawk smile widening. "The woman who single-handedly saved our Chicago division. Get over here and let me shake your hand." Savannah walked toward him on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. His handshake was firm, brief, and surprisingly warm. $18 million, he said, still holding her hand. "Do you know the last time someone at your level closed a deal that size?" No, sir. Never." His eyes glittered. "It's never happened. And yet here you are. Victoria, come meet Miss Pierce." Victoria unfolded herself from the settee with the grace of a cat and glided over. Up close, Savannah could smell her perfume, something floral and undoubtedly French, and see the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes that even the best surgeons couldn't quite erase. "How lovely," Victoria said, taking Savannah's hand in both of hers. Her fingers were cold. Harrison has told me so much about you, the little miracle worker from the Chicago office. Little. Savannah forced a smile. It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore. Please call me Victoria. Another glacial sweep of those green eyes. That dress is stunning on you, dear. Valentino, isn't it? From the fall collection? Something in her tone made Savannah's stomach tighten. Yes, I almost bought that one myself. Victoria's smile was porcelain and poison, but I thought it looked better on the runway. Some pieces just don't translate to real life, do they? Before Savannah could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation. Mother. The single word was low, quiet, and carried the unmistakable edge of a warning. Savannah turned, and the room fell away. He was standing in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, as if he'd stopped mid-stride. Tall, taller than his father, with dark hair that was just long enough to be rebellious and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore his tuxedo like an afterthought, the bow tie already loosened, and everything about him radiated a kind of reluctant elegance. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place. They were gray, not the soft gray of clouds or morning fog, the gray of steel, of storm fronts, of things that could cut you if you weren't careful. And right now, those eyes were fixed on Savannah with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Callum, Victoria said smoothly, how kind of you to finally join us. This is Miss Savannah Pierce, the one your father won't stop talking about. Callum Whitmore didn't move. He was staring at her, through her, with an expression she couldn't read. Surprise, confusion, something else entirely. Miss Pierce. His voice was low, rough at the edges. I've heard about your work. Savannah's mouth was dry. All good things, I hope. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. That remains to be seen. Victoria's gaze moved between them, and something shifted in her expression, something calculating and cold. Well, she said, slipping her arm through Savannah's with a grip that felt less like friendliness and more like possession. Why don't I give you the grand tour before dinner? I'm sure there are so many things we have to talk about. As Victoria steered her away, Savannah glanced back over her shoulder. Callum Whitmore was still watching her, and in his gray eyes, she saw something that looked almost like hunger. The grand tour, Savannah quickly realized, was not a tour at all. It was an interrogation dressed in silk. Victoria Whitmore guided her through room after room of the estate, her arm linked through Savannah's with deceptive intimacy, her voice never rising above that cultured murmur that somehow managed to carry the weight of a guillotine blade. This is the library, Victoria said, gesturing to floor-to-ceiling shelves that held more books than most public libraries. First editions, mostly. Harrison started collecting them when Callum was born. He had this romantic notion that his son would grow up to be a scholar. A delicate pause. Children rarely become what we envision for them, do they? Savannah said nothing. She was beginning to understand that Victoria's questions weren't meant to be answered. They moved through the music room, a Steinway that had once belonged to a Russian duchess, the solarium, imported Italian tile, 300 years old, and a gallery filled with contemporary art that made Savannah's eyes hurt. Tell me about yourself, dear, Victoria said as they paused before a canvas that appeared to be nothing but violent slashes of red. Where did you go to school? University of Illinois? Chicago campus? How practical. Victoria's smile didn't waver. And your family? What does your father do? The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. He was a mechanic, Savannah said carefully. He passed away when I was 17. Oh, how tragic. Victoria placed a hand over her heart in a gesture that might have seemed genuine from anyone else. And your mother? She works at a grocery store in Rockford. Rockford. Victoria repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. I've driven through there, I think, on the way to somewhere else. They walked in silence for a moment, and Savannah felt the walls of the estate pressing closer. Every painting, every antique, every crystal vase worth more than her mother's annual salary. All of it seemed designed to remind her exactly how far she was from home. "You must be very proud," Victoria continued, "coming from such humble beginnings and climbing so high. It's very American, isn't it? The bootstrap mythology. I've worked hard. I'm sure you have." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the corridor, her eyes looked almost black. "But I wonder, Miss Pierce, Savannah, do you ever worry that you've climbed too high? Too fast?" Savannah's pulse quickened. "I'm not sure what you mean. Only that ambition can be a dangerous thing, especially for young women who don't fully understand the terrain they're navigating." Victoria reached out and adjusted a strand of Savannah's hair with maternal precision. "The Whitmores have built something extraordinary over 4 generations. We're very protective of it, and of each other." The words hung in the air between them. Before Savannah could respond, footsteps echoed from somewhere behind them. "There you are." Callum's voice rolled through the corridor like thunder in the distance. Victoria's expression flickered, loss of control, annoyance, before smoothing back into its porcelain mask. "Darling," she said, turning to face her son, "I was just showing Miss Pierce the collection. She seems quite overwhelmed by it all." "I'm sure she is." Callum moved toward them with a predator's easy grace. He had removed his jacket at some point, and his white shirt stretched across shoulders that suggested he did more with his time than sit in boardrooms. "Father's looking for you. Something about the seating arrangement." "Of course he is." Victoria sighed with theatrical weariness. That man would rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. She turned back to Savannah with another of those razor-edged smiles. "We'll continue our chat later, dear. I feel like we're just getting to know each other." She swept away down the corridor, leaving behind only the ghost of her perfume and a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Savannah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Are you all right?" Callum was watching her with those gray eyes, and up close she could see flecks of blue in them, like cracks in ice. "Fine," she said. "Your mother is very thorough." Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. "That's one word for it." "What word would you use?" "Several. None of them appropriate for polite company." Savannah blinked. And then, against every instinct screaming at her to stay guarded, she laughed. It came out louder than she intended, bouncing off the walls of the corridor, and she immediately clapped a hand over her mouth. But when she looked at Callum, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "Sorry," she said. "I shouldn't—" "Don't." His voice was rough. "Don't apologize. This house hasn't heard genuine laughter in years." Something shifted between them. The air felt thinner, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Why are you here?" Savannah asked quietly. "Everyone says you left, that you wanted nothing to do with any of this." Callum's jaw tightened. "Everyone says a lot of things. That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He took a step closer, and Savannah caught his scent, something woodsy and warm that cut through the museum-like sterility of the estate. Her heart was doing something dangerous in her chest. "Can I give you some advice, Miss Pierce?" "Savannah." "Savannah." The way he said her name made her skin prickle. "My father invited you here because you're useful to him. My mother is being gracious because she's trying to figure out exactly how useful and how much of a threat that makes you. This dinner isn't a celebration, it's an audition." "An audition for what?" "That's what they're deciding." His eyes held hers. "The question is, what do you want it to be?" Before she could answer, a chime echoed through the house. "Dinner," Callum said. He offered his arm with a formality that felt almost mocking. "Shall I escort you to the lion's den?" Savannah looked at his arm, then at his face. "I thought we were already in it." That ghost of a smile again. "That was just the outer perimeter." She took his arm. His muscles tensed beneath her fingers, and she heard his breath catch, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. When she glanced up at him, he was looking straight ahead, his jaw set like a man preparing for battle. They walked in silence toward the dining room. But just before they reached the doors, Callum stopped. "Savannah." She looked up at him. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "don't let them see you break." That's what she wants. But he was already pushing open the doors. The dining room blazed with candlelight. Crystal and silver glittered on a table that could seat 20. A dozen faces turned toward them, executives, socialites, people whose names Savannah had only ever seen in newspapers. And at the head of the table, Victoria Whitmore sat like a queen on her throne. Her emerald eyes found Savannah, and she smiled. "There you are, darling," she called out, her voice carrying across the room. "I was just telling everyone about our fascinating conversation, about your mother, the grocery clerk, and your father, rest his soul." She lifted her wine glass. "To humble beginnings." The room raised their glasses, and Savannah felt the first crack form in her armor. Savannah sat frozen as the toast echoed around her. To humble beginnings. The words were a knife wrapped in velvet, and every person at that table knew it. She could see it in the way they glanced at her, some with pity, others with the barely concealed delight of spectators at a blood sport. She reached for her water glass. Her hand was steady. That was something. "Savannah, dear, you must sit next to me," Victoria called out, patting the chair to her right. "I insist." "Of course you do." Callum's hand brushed the small of her back, brief, barely there, and then he was moving to the opposite end of the table, taking his place beside his father. When their eyes met across the sea of crystal and candlelight, she saw something in his expression that might have been an apology or a warning. Savannah walked to her designated seat with her chin held high. She would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She had survived worse than this. She had survived her father's death, her mother's grief, the crushing weight of student loans and unpaid internships and years of being overlooked and underestimated. She could survive one dinner. "Now then," Victoria said as the first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of something that looked like modern art and probably cost more than Savannah's monthly rent. "Tell us more about this miraculous contract. $18 million. Harrison hasn't stopped talking about it." "There's not much to tell," Savannah said carefully. "Paradigm Technologies needed a partner who understood their vision. I made sure they knew we were that partner." "How wonderfully modest." Victoria's smile was all teeth. "But surely there's more to it than that. I mean, how does a girl from, where was it, Rockford, learn to speak the language of a company like Paradigm?" "The same way anyone learns anything, Mrs. Whitmore. Study, practice, hard work." "Victoria, please." "And of course, hard work." She said the words like they were slightly distasteful. "But don't you find that there are certain barriers, certain social currencies that can't simply be earned?" Savannah felt the eyes of the table on her. "I think," she said slowly, "that the only barriers that truly matter are the ones we accept." A ripple of reaction moved through the guests. She couldn't tell if it was approval or shock. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. How inspiring. She turned to the woman on her left, a skeletal socialite dripping in diamonds. "Margaret, didn't your daughter just start one of those little scholarship programs for underprivileged youth?" And so it went, course after course, each more elaborate than the last, and with every one, Victoria found new ways to draw attention to Savannah's background. Her state school education, her lack of connections, the fact that she rented her apartment instead of owning property. Each observation was delivered with poisonous sweetness, each one designed to remind everyone at the table exactly where Savannah Pierce came from, and how far beneath them that was. The worst part was that it was working. Savannah could feel herself shrinking. Every time she reached for her fork, she second-guessed which one to use. Every time she spoke, she heard the flatness of her Midwestern accent against the polished tones around her. She was a fraud, a pretender, a girl playing dress-up in a borrowed gown. Stop it, she told herself fiercely. This is exactly what she wants. But knowing it and feeling it were two different things. Tell me, Savannah, Victoria said as the main course was cleared. Do you have a young man in your life? Someone special waiting for you back in the city? The question caught her off guard. No. My work keeps me busy. What a shame. A pretty girl like you all alone. Victoria sighed dramatically. Though I suppose it's difficult, isn't it? Finding someone suitable when you're so focused on climbing the ladder. Men can be so intimidated by ambitious women. Some men, Savannah said quietly. I'm sorry? Some men are intimidated. She looked up and, without meaning to, her gaze found Callum's across the table. Others aren't. The moment stretched like a wire pulled taut. Callum was watching her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. He hadn't spoken much during dinner, a few words to his father, a polite response to a question from another guest. But she had felt his attention on her like a physical weight. Every time Victoria landed a blow, she'd seen his jaw tighten. Every time the table laughed at her expense, she'd seen his hands clench around his silverware. Victoria followed her gaze, and something dangerous flickered in those emerald eyes. Callum, darling, she said, her voice carrying the length of the table. What do you think of Miss Pierce? You've been so quiet tonight. Every head turned toward him. Callum set down his wineglass with deliberate care. I think, he said slowly, that she's the most impressive person at this table. Silence. Complete, ringing silence. Savannah's heart stopped. Victoria's smile froze on her face. I'm sorry, she said. $18 million. Callum's voice was calm, almost casual, but there was steel beneath it. Closed by someone with no family connections, no inherited wealth, no advantages except her own intelligence and determination. While the rest of us were handed everything we have, she built something from nothing. His gray eyes swept the table, and Savannah saw several guests flinch. So, yes, Mother, I find her impressive. I find her extraordinary. The silence that followed was deafening. Savannah couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't do anything except stare at Callum Whitmore as he looked back at her with an expression that made her feel like the only person in the room. Victoria recovered first. Well, she said, and her voice was ice wrapped in silk. How touching. My son, the champion of the working class. She reached for her wineglass, and Savannah noticed that her hand wasn't quite steady. I had no idea you felt so strongly about merit. There's a lot you don't know about me, Mother. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Harrison cleared his throat loudly. I think it's time for dessert, don't you? Victoria, why don't we… Actually, Victoria interrupted, rising from her chair with fluid grace. I think Miss Pierce might benefit from some fresh air. She's looking rather flushed. She smiled down at Savannah, and in that smile was every ounce of venom she'd been holding back all evening. The terrace is lovely this time of night. Callum, why don't you show her? Since you find her so… extraordinary. It was a command, not a suggestion. And it was a trap. Savannah knew it. Callum knew it. Everyone at that table knew it. But when Callum stood and offered her his hand, she took it anyway. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady, and something electric shot up her arm. She rose from her chair on legs that felt like water, and together they walked toward the terrace doors. Behind them, she heard Victoria's voice resume its honeyed murmur. Now, where were we? Oh yes, Margaret. You were telling me about your daughter's little charity. The terrace doors closed behind them, and Savannah finally let herself breathe. The night air hit Savannah's skin like a blessing. She walked to the edge of the terrace and gripped the stone balustrade, letting the cold seep into her palms. Below, the Whitmore Gardens stretched into darkness, manicured hedges and marble fountains and paths that probably led to secret places where the wealthy hid from their own emptiness. Behind her, she heard Callum's footsteps. Then silence. "You shouldn't have done that," she said without turning around. "Done what?" "You know what." She spun to face him. "That speech, calling me extraordinary in front of everyone. Your mother already hated me. Now she'll what?" Callum moved closer, and the moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face. "Make passive-aggressive comments about your background. Find subtle ways to remind you that you don't belong." She was already doing that, Savannah. She's been doing it all night. And you just made it worse. "No." His voice dropped. "I told the truth. There's a difference." Savannah shook her head, frustration and something else, something warmer, warring in her chest. "Why do you even care? You don't know me. We met 3 hours ago." Callum was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know why I left?" he asked finally. 5 years ago, when I walked away from all of this?" She waited. "Because I couldn't stand watching people like my mother destroy people like you." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I sat through 18 years of dinners exactly like this one, watching her pick apart anyone she considered beneath her. Housekeepers, assistants, my father's employees, anyone who had the audacity to exist in her orbit without a trust fund or a pedigree." He turned away from her, staring out at the dark gardens. "I told myself I was different, that I could change things from the inside. But I couldn't. The system is designed to protect itself, and people like my mother are the antibodies. They destroy anything that threatens the order." He paused. "So I left. Started my own company. Built something that had nothing to do with the Whitmore name." Savannah moved to stand beside him. "What brought you back?" His jaw tightened. "My father had a heart attack 6 months ago. Doctors said he had a year, maybe 2, if he reduced his stress." Another hollow laugh. "Harrison Whitmore doesn't know how to reduce stress. The company is his stress. So I made him a deal. I'd come back. I'd learn the business. I'd be the heir he always wanted." His hands gripped the balustrade. "In exchange, he retires. Steps away completely. Lets me run things my way." "And your mother?" "My mother thinks she can control me the way she controls everyone else." He looked at Savannah, and in the moonlight, his gray eyes were almost silver. "She's wrong." Something cracked open in Savannah's chest. She had spent the entire evening feeling small, feeling like an imposter, a charity case, a girl from Rockford who had somehow stumbled into a world where she would never truly belong. But standing here with Callum Whitmore, this man who had everything and walked away from it, who had built himself from scratch just like she had, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt seen. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "about your father. Don't be. He made his choices." But his voice was rough, and she could hear the grief beneath the words. "That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." He turned to look at her fully then, and something shifted in his expression. The walls she had sensed around him, those carefully constructed defenses, seemed to thin. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "See through everything. The money, the performance, the—" He gestured vaguely at the mansion behind them. "All of it. You've been here for 3 hours, and you see more clearly than people who've known this family for decades." Savannah smiled sadly. "Maybe because I've never had the luxury of illusions." When you grow up with nothing, you learn to see things as they are. It's a survival skill. It's more than that. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. Close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the slight unevenness of his nose that suggested it had been broken once. Imperfections that made him more real, more human. Savannah. The way he said her name turned it into something different, something intimate. "Your mother is going to make my life very difficult," she whispered. "Whatever this is, whatever you think is happening, I don't think. I know." His hand came up and his fingers brushed her jaw. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, and it sent electricity cascading down her spine. I knew the moment I saw you, standing in that doorway, looking at my mother like she was a problem to be solved, rather than a monster to be feared. She is a problem to be solved. See? A ghost of a smile. You're not afraid of anything. That's not true. Her voice was barely audible. I'm afraid right now. Of what? Of you, she thought. Of how you're looking at me. Of how much I want you to keep looking at me like that forever. But before she could answer, the terrace doors flew open. There you are! Victoria's voice shattered the moment like glass. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from the dining room, and even from 10 feet away, Savannah could see the fury barely contained beneath her perfect composure. Dessert is being served, Victoria said coolly. Harrison is asking for you, Callum. Something about the quarterly projections. Callum didn't move. He can wait. He's your father, and he's ill. Victoria's eyes flicked to Savannah, and in them was something cold and calculating. I'm sure Miss Pierce understands. Family comes first. Isn't that right, dear? I imagine your mother taught you that, between shifts at the grocery store. The words landed exactly as intended. Savannah felt herself flinch before she could stop it, and she saw Victoria notice, saw the tiny flicker of satisfaction in those emerald eyes. I should go, Savannah said quietly. It's getting late. Savannah, Callum started. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Whitmore. She was already moving toward the doors, toward escape, toward anywhere that wasn't here. Please tell Mr. Whitmore I appreciated the invitation. Of course, dear. Victoria stepped aside to let her pass, and as Savannah moved by her, she felt the older woman's hand close around her wrist. The grip was brief, but bruising. We should have lunch sometime. I'd love to hear more about your ambitions. Savannah pulled her hand free. She didn't look back as she walked through the dining room, past the curious stares and whispered conversations, past the crystal and silver and all the trappings of a world that would never accept her. She didn't look back as she collected her borrowed shawl and stepped into the waiting limousine. But as the car pulled away from Whitmore House, she let herself look through the rear window. Callum was standing on the front steps, alone, watching her go. And even from this distance, she could see the storm in his eyes. 3 days of silence. Savannah stared at her computer screen without seeing it, the quarterly report blurring into meaningless shapes. Outside her new corner office, a perk of her promotion that now felt like a gilded cage, the Chicago skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. She hadn't been able to appreciate it. She hadn't been able to appreciate anything since that night. Her phone sat on her desk, dark and silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. She told herself it was better this way. Whatever had sparked between her and Callum on that terrace, that electric, terrifying, wonderful thing, it could never survive the reality of their worlds. He was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. She was a girl from Rockford, with a borrowed dress and a mother who worked at a grocery store. Victoria had made sure she understood that. Family comes first. A knock at her door made her jump. Miss Pierce? Her assistant, a nervous young man named Derek, peered in. Mr. Carver wants to see you, right away. Savannah's stomach dropped. Richard Carver was the regional director, the man who had promoted her. In 6 years at the company, she had been summoned to his office exactly twice, once to receive a warning about her aggressive client acquisition tactics, and once to learn about her promotion. This would be the 3rd time, and somehow she knew it wouldn't be good news. Carver's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the 32nd floor. Savannah had always found it excessive. The mahogany desk the size of a small car, the leather chairs that cost more than her first apartment, the original artwork that screamed, "I have money, and I need you to know it." But today, as she stepped through the door, the excess felt oppressive, suffocating. Carver stood at the window with his back to her. Close the door. She did. Sit down. She didn't. Miss Pierce. He turned, and his expression confirmed every fear that had been clawing at her chest. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that comes directly from Whitmore House. He moved to his desk and picked up a folder. I received a call this morning from Victoria Whitmore. The name landed like a physical blow. She has concerns, Carver continued, flipping open the folder. About your conduct at the dinner, about your interactions with her son. My interactions? Savannah's voice came out sharper than intended. I spoke to him, briefly. That's all. That's not how it's been characterized to me. Then how has it been characterized? Carver looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something that might have been sympathy, or might have been self-preservation. Mrs. Whitmore believes you've been using your position to pursue a personal relationship with the heir to this company. She believes your promotion was a calculated move to gain access to the family. He paused. She's recommending that you be transferred to the Omaha office. The words didn't make sense at first. They rattled around in Savannah's brain like loose coins, refusing to form a coherent shape. Omaha, she repeated. It's a lateral move. Same title, same salary. You'd be leading their development team. Their development team has 3 people. Savannah, I closed an $18 million contract. Her voice was rising now, and she couldn't stop it. I saved this division. And you're going to ship me off to Omaha because Victoria Whitmore has decided I'm a threat to her dynasty? I'm going to do what's best for this company. Carver's tone hardened. And right now, what's best is keeping the Whitmore family happy. They own 60% of our stock. They are this company. And if Victoria Whitmore wants you gone, then I'm gone. He didn't deny it. Savannah stood there, feeling the ground crumble beneath her feet. 6 years. 6 years of 80-hour weeks and missed holidays and relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition. All of it meaningless. All of it erased by one woman with a vendetta and enough money to make it stick. When? She asked quietly. End of the month. HR will handle the details. Carver closed the folder. I'm sorry, Savannah. For what it's worth, I think you're the best closer I've ever seen, but this is bigger than both of us. She turned and walked out without another word. The elevator doors closed, and Savannah let herself fall apart. She pressed her back against the wall and squeezed her eyes shut, willing the tears not to come. She would not cry. She would not give Victoria Whitmore the satisfaction, even from miles away. But God, it hurt. The elevator stopped on the 28th floor. The doors opened, and Callum Whitmore stepped inside. Time stopped. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been painted on, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw her, he went completely still. Savannah. What are you doing here? Her voice was ice. It had to be. I came to see you. Your assistant said you were in Carver's office. His gray eyes swept over her face, reading everything she was trying to hide. What happened? Nothing. Don't lie to me. Why not? She laughed bitterly. Apparently lying is what I do, using my position to seduce the heir to the throne. That's what your mother told Carver. That's why I'm being transferred to Omaha. Callum's expression transformed. She had never seen rage like that before, cold and absolute and terrifying in its stillness. His jaw turned to granite. His hands clenched at his sides. She did what? You heard me. Omaha. He said the word like a curse. She's sending you to Omaha? End of the month. A lateral move, they called it. Same title, same salary, just 1,000 miles away from you. Savannah's voice cracked despite her best efforts. She wins, Callum. That's how this story ends. The queen protects her kingdom, and the girl from Rockford goes back to where she belongs. No. No. This isn't over. He stepped closer, and she could see the fury still blazing in his eyes, but beneath it, something else. something fierce and determined and almost desperate. I won't let her do this to you. I won't let her destroy your career because she's afraid. Afraid of what? Of losing me again. The words hung between them. Callum, I'm going to fix this. He reached out and took her hands, and his grip was strong and warm and certain. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She looked at him, this man she barely knew who had already turned her entire life upside down, and she knew what the smart answer was. The safe answer. Yes, she whispered. He lifted her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Go home. Pack a bag. Meet me at this address tomorrow morning. He pulled a card from his pocket and pressed it into her palm. And Savannah? Yes. Don't answer any calls from my mother. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby. Callum stepped out without looking back. And Savannah looked down at the card in her hand. An address, downtown, and 2 words written beneath it in bold black ink. Trust me. The address led to a building Savannah had walked past 100 times without noticing. It was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, tucked between 2 older structures in the heart of downtown Chicago. No signage, no indication of what lay inside. Just a single door with a keypad and a small camera that blinked red as she approached. She was about to press the intercom when the door swung open. Callum stood in the entrance, and the sight of him made her breath catch. He wasn't wearing a suit today, just dark jeans and a gray sweater that matched his eyes, and somehow he looked more powerful like this, more himself, than he ever had in a tuxedo. You came, he said. You asked me to trust you. Something softened in his expression. And you do? I'm here, aren't I? He stepped aside to let her in. The lobby was minimalist. White walls, concrete floors, a single reception desk that sat empty. But beyond the glass doors at the far end, she could see an open workspace buzzing with activity. People at computers, whiteboards covered in diagrams, the organized chaos of creation. What is this place? She asked. Mine. Callum led her toward the glass doors. I told you I started my own company when I left. This is it. Whitmore Ventures. Whitmore Ventures? She raised an eyebrow. I thought you wanted nothing to do with the family name. I wanted nothing to do with the family legacy. The name. He shrugged. It's still mine, and I decided I'd rather redefine it than run from it. The glass doors opened into a world that felt light years away from Whitmore House. The space was alive with energy, young professionals collaborating at standing desks, a coffee bar where people gathered in animated conversation, walls covered with mission statements about sustainable technology and ethical investing. Everything about it felt intentional, purposeful. We fund startups, Callum explained as they walked through. Clean energy, education technology, healthcare access. Companies that are actually trying to solve problems instead of just generating profit. Savannah looked around in wonder. This is what you've been doing for 5 years. This is what I've been building. He stopped and turned to face her. And this is what I'm offering you. She blinked. What? Director of Strategic Development. Same title you have now, but here you'd actually be able to use it. You'd lead our acquisition team, identify companies worth investing in, structure deals that matter. His gray eyes held hers. No Omaha. No Victoria. No one telling you where you belong. The offer hit her like a wave. Callum, I can't. Why not? Because it would prove her right. The words burst out of her. Don't you see? If I leave Whitmore and Associates and come work for you, everyone will say exactly what she's been saying. That I used my position to get close to you. That everything I accomplished was just a stepping stone to this. Who cares what they say? I care. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to collect herself. I've spent my entire life proving that I earned my place, that I'm not just some charity case who got lucky. If I take this job, everything I've worked for, all of it, becomes a footnote. She climbed her way up, And then she married the boss. The word landed between them. Married. Callum went very still. Is that what you think this is about? He asked quietly. You think I'm offering you a job because I want to… What? Own you? Control you? No, I'm offering you this because you're extraordinary. He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something raw and urgent. I'm offering you this because in 30 years of watching my family destroy everything it touches, you're the first person I've met who made me believe something different was possible. I'm offering you this because He stopped. The air between them crackled. Because you what? Savannah whispered. Before he could answer, his phone rang. The sound shattered the moment. Callum pulled the phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his expression turned to stone. My father, he said. I have to take this. He stepped away, and Savannah watched his face as he listened. Watched it go from tense to shocked, to something that looked like grief. When he hung up, he didn't look at her. My mother called an emergency board meeting, he said. She's trying to remove my father as CEO. She's claiming he's medically unfit to lead. Can she do that? With enough votes? His jaw tightened. And she's had months to gather them while I was busy trying to save his life. Callum. I have to go. He was already moving toward the door. The meeting's in an hour. If I'm not there, then go. She caught his arm. Go fight for your family. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Come with me. What? Come with me. To the meeting. His eyes blazed with something fierce and certain. I'm going to end this, Savannah. Today. And I want you there when I do. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a mistake. That walking into that boardroom would be throwing herself directly into Victoria's crosshairs. That she should stay far, far away from this war between mother and son. But Callum was looking at her like she was his anchor. Like she was the only thing keeping him from drowning. Okay, she said. The boardroom at Whitmore and Associates occupied the entire top floor. Savannah had never been inside before. It was reserved for executives and family members, a sanctum of power that people like her only heard about in whispers. But when the elevator doors opened, she understood immediately why it inspired such reverence. The room was a cathedral of glass and marble. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. The table was long enough to seat 30 and made of wood so dark it was almost black. And at the head of that table, presiding over a crowd of nervous board members, sat Victoria Whitmore. She looked up as Callum entered. Her emerald eyes flicked to Savannah, and her face transformed into something terrible and triumphant. Well, she said coolly, how touching. The prodigal son arrives with his little project. This meeting is over, Mother. On the contrary, we're just getting started. Victoria stood, and her gaze swept the room. As I was explaining to the board, Harrison's health has deteriorated to the point where he can no longer fulfill his duties. The company needs stable leadership. It needs someone who understands the importance of legacy. Legacy? Callum laughed bitterly. You don't care about legacy. You care about control. I care about protecting what this family has built, which is more than I can say for you. Her eyes cut to Savannah again. Running around with employees, making promises you can't keep. You've always been weak, Callum. Sentimental. Maybe. He stepped forward and his voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. But I'm also the only person in this room who knows what Dad actually wants. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Harrison Whitmore signed this yesterday. It's a transfer of all his voting shares. To me. He dropped the folder on the table. As of this morning, I control 62% of this company. So your little coup? He smiled coldly. It's over. The room erupted. Victoria's face went white. And through the chaos, Callum turned and looked at Savannah. In his gray eyes was a question. Is this enough? Am I enough? She smiled at him, and she saw the answer dawn across his face. One satisfying year later. Savannah stood at the window of her new corner office. Not the one at Whitmore and Associates, but the one at Whitmore Ventures, with its view of the Chicago River and its walls covered in photos of the companies she'd helped build. Clean energy startups, education platforms, healthcare innovations that were actually reaching the people who needed them. She had never been happier. A knock at her door made her turn. "You're going to be late." Callum leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with that half-smile that still made her heart stumble after 12 months. He was wearing a tuxedo, the same one from that first night, she realized. But this time, the bow tie was perfectly straight. "I'm savoring," she said. "Savoring what?" "This moment, before everything changes." He crossed the room and slipped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. "Everything already changed," he murmured against her hair. "The moment you walked into my parents' house in that borrowed dress, looking at my mother like she was a bug you were deciding whether to step on." Savannah laughed. "I was terrified. You were magnificent." He pulled back to look at her. "You still are." She reached up and adjusted his tie, a habit now, something she did without thinking. "Your mother is going to be there tonight." "I know. She still hates me. She's learning to live with disappointment." It was true. Victoria Whitmore had not gone quietly. After Callum's takeover of the board, she had fought viciously, threatening, manipulating, calling in every favor she'd accumulated over 3 decades of social warfare. But without the voting shares, her power had crumbled. Harrison, finally free from her influence, had moved to their house in Palm Beach and started painting watercolors. He sent Savannah one every month. Victoria remained in Chicago, a queen without a kingdom, her emerald eyes still sharp but her claws finally clipped. She and Savannah had lunch occasionally. It was always uncomfortable, but it was progress. "We should go," Savannah said. "The foundation won't launch itself." "Actually, it might. You've planned this thing down to the second." "That's because it matters." Callum's expression softened. "I know it does. The Pierce Foundation for Educational Access." Savannah had spent 6 months building it, a scholarship program for first-generation college students, funded by Whitmore Ventures and matched by corporate donors across the city. Tonight's gala would raise enough money to send 500 students to college next year. Her mother was flying in from Rockford. She was going to cry. Savannah had already accepted this. "Ready?" Callum asked. She took a deep breath. Ready. The gala was held at the Art Institute. Savannah had chosen the venue deliberately. It was a place that belonged to everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the connected, but anyone who wanted to walk through its doors and be moved by something beautiful. Tonight, 500 of Chicago's most influential people would write checks in a building that a kid from Rockford could visit for free. There was poetry in that. She and Callum arrived to a storm of flashbulbs. The press had become fascinated by their story. The heiress hunter narrative that Victoria had tried to spin had transformed somehow into a romance that people actually rooted for. The girl who earned her place. The heir who walked away from everything and built something better. Savannah still wasn't used to the attention, but she was learning to use it. Inside, the museum glowed with candlelight. Guests mingled beneath Monets and Picassos, champagne flutes in hand, and Savannah felt that familiar flutter of imposter syndrome. "I don't belong here. These people can see right through me," before she caught sight of her mother standing near the entrance. Linda Pierce was wearing a blue dress that Savannah had bought her for Christmas. Her hair was done up in a style she'd clearly practiced, and she was clutching her purse with both hands, looking around the room with an expression of pure overwhelm. Savannah's heart cracked open. "Mom!" Linda turned, and her face transformed. "Oh, honey." She pulled Savannah into a hug that smelled like home, like fabric softener and the vanilla lotion she'd worn for 30 years. "Look at this. Look at what you did. It's not just me. Don't." Linda pulled back and held her daughter's face in her hands. "Don't you dare minimize this. Your father would be so proud of you. I am so proud of you." Savannah blinked back tears. "Mom, this is Callum." She turned to introduce him, but he was already stepping forward, hand extended, that perfect smile in place. "Mrs. Pierce, it's an honor." Linda looked at him, then at Savannah, then back at him. "You're the one who made my daughter smile again," she said. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." Something passed between them, an understanding, a blessing, a welcome into a family that had never had much but had always had each other. Callum took Linda's hand and squeezed it. "The honor is mine." The speeches came later. Savannah stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and for a moment she couldn't speak. These people, some of them the same people who had whispered about her at Victoria's dinner table, were here to support something she had built, something that would change lives. "When I was 17, she began, "my father died. He was a mechanic. He worked 60 hours a week, and he still couldn't afford to send me to college. So I worked too. I took out loans. I applied for every scholarship I could find, and I got rejected from most of them." She paused. "I made it anyway, but I was lucky." And luck shouldn't be the determining factor in whether a kid gets an education. She talked about the foundation, about the students it would serve, about the donors who had made it possible, and the mentors who had volunteered their time. And then she looked at Callum, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her with those gray eyes that had seen her from the very first moment. "Someone told me recently that the only barriers that truly matter are the ones we accept," she said. "I've spent my whole life refusing to accept them. Tonight, I'm asking you to refuse with me." The applause was thunderous. Later, after the checks were written and the champagne was drunk and her mother had been safely deposited in a town car back to her hotel, Savannah found Callum on the museum steps. The city sparkled below them. "18 million, he said. "What?" "We raised $18 million tonight." He turned to look at her. "Same as the Paradigm contract. The one that started all of this." Savannah laughed. "I didn't plan that. I know. That's what makes it perfect." He reached into his pocket. Her heart stopped. "Callum, I had a whole speech prepared." He pulled out a small velvet box. "About how you changed everything. About how I spent 5 years trying to build something meaningful, and then you walked into my life and showed me what meaningful actually looks like." He opened the box. "But I think you already know all of that." The ring was simple, elegant, a single diamond on a platinum band. It was exactly right. "Savannah Pierce," his voice was rough, "will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, at his face, at the city spread out below them. This city that had broken her down and built her back up, that had tested her and doubted her, and finally embraced her. "Yes," she whispered. He slid the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her. And standing there in the glow of a museum that belonged to everyone, wearing a dress that she had actually bought herself, Savannah Pierce finally understood something she had been searching for her entire life. She belonged. Not because of where she came from, or who she knew, or what she had earned, but because she had found someone who saw her completely, and loved her, anyway. 5 years later, the house in Lincoln Park wasn't a mansion. It had 4 bedrooms, a garden that Savannah was slowly killing despite her best efforts, and a kitchen where Callum made pancakes every Sunday morning. Their daughter, Eleanor, Ellie, had just turned 3 and had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. The Pierce Foundation had sent over 10,000 students to college. Whitmore Ventures had become a model for ethical investing. And Victoria Whitmore had, against all odds and expectations, become something almost resembling a grandmother. She still made comments about Savannah's Midwestern accent. She still arrived at holidays with gifts that were just slightly too extravagant. But she also sat on the floor with Ellie and built block towers. She also called every week to check in. People could change. It just took them a while. On the morning of their 5th anniversary, Savannah woke to find Callum's side of the bed empty. She padded downstairs and found him in the kitchen, Ellie on his hip, both of them covered in flour. "We're making you breakfast," he announced. "I can see that." "Pancakes!" Ellie shrieked. Savannah laughed, and Callum caught her eye over their daughter's head, and in that look was everything. Every battle they'd fought, every obstacle they'd overcome, every moment of doubt and fear and joy that had led them here, to this kitchen, to this family, to this life they had built together. "I love you," she said. Callum smiled. "I know." The end.